Good afternoon, it's Lee Cassidy from Tactile Technology, and we're talking about cybersecurity again today. And we're going to focus on ransomware. So I'm going to bring in Shaq from Pentera first. How you doing, Shaq?
Yeah, not too bad. Nice to see you, Lee. Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we're going to talk about ransomware, but we're going to look at it from a slightly different perspective, aren't we? We're going to look at it from an offensive perspective and look at it how vulnerable we are to that ransomware attack. But I think a good starting point would be some stats. I know you've got some stats for us to look at. So if I bring those up, so do you want to talk us through some of these statistics then?
Yeah, really interesting. Just a sort of site that you can look up as well, and it tracks ransomware incidents, and we can see it month by month. And like anything, right? Sometimes we hear about ransomware in the news, sometimes we don't. But it's a problem that's there all the time. You know, there are people that are impacted. Obviously, we hear about some of the more high-profile cases. We can see there's a massive spike in March as well,
Definitely,
for various
way
reasons.
beyond. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's really interesting about this site that I really like is we can just see all the different families that are out there of ransomware. They all have specific things that they do. Some of them are similar in terms of techniques. The big one there is Lockbit 3.0. We can see in Conti, and they make up about a third of like the overall attacks. There's a lot of smaller sort of families of ransomware. Some of them emulate, what others do as well. But it's a problem that's not going away, right? And this is kind of
Yeah. I think
proof of that.
might be good for those. So we're going to have people who know what ransomware is and work in
Yeah.
this space. But if anybody's watching this who doesn't, is not familiar with what ransomware is and how it fits together, ransomware is just a generic term for someone using some kind of offensive technology to effectively take money from you. So that could be encrypting all your files. There's a variety of things, locking you out of your systems and then extorting you for money to be able to get access to those files or those systems again. So that's what ransomware is itself. The way it's done is using some kind of technology. So Conti, Lockbit, and these people are hacker groups that have actually created their own mechanism to be able to infest your systems with an ability to encrypt files and things and then extort you for it. So it's just clarifying that piece. So Lockbit, give us a picture of how Lockbit works then.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And probably the best way to describe it is just looking at a scenario within Pentera where we can emulate something like Lockbit, look at all of what we call the TTPs, so the different techniques that are used in order to propagate an attack. I think the other thing, just interestingly to say on that, is that there is also things like double extortion, right? So nowadays we see the trend where not only are they encrypting your data, they're also then threatening to publish some of that somewhere on the website, right? And Lockbit does that, and others do that as well. We see lots of incidents of where certain data is going to be released out into the public domain, and that is almost, I guess, a way of then getting the victims to pay out, right? They don't
Yeah.
want to certainly see their dirty laundry being aired.
Well, if you think about any cybersecurity breach, there are three real issues with this. One, you've got your data has been compromised, and you've got to deal with getting back into your systems. There's your compliance issue. So your compliance organisation, if it's PCI for a payment card infrastructure, if it's FCA, if you're financially regulated, or whoever, again, you've got a compliance issue there, and you've got to report that you've
Yeah.
been breached. Again, you'll get fined if you don't, and also they'll look into if you'd actually put enough protection in there. But the third real impact is from your customers, because if
Yeah.
they don't feel you put the effort in to protect the systems that they're having access to and the information about them and their dealings with you there, again, that's even a bigger problem because you're going to lose those customers. And I think the financial impact of that reputational impact can be actually much greater than any other impact you get from a breach.
Yeah, it can, right? I think sometimes as IT people, as techies, we kind of think, well, we can get away with a downtime of a system. Sometimes, even it could be even a few hours, right? It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be days necessarily, but the reputational damage is done. right? It
Yeah.
just takes somebody to report or whatever, right, to sort of carry out an attack that then affects that confidence from a customer point. And what customers are, what they're going to do, they're going to vote with their money at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And it's happened, right? We've seen various breaches happen as well as part of that, off the back of that. And
And some
customers
big names as well. Yeah,
some big
we've
names,
had
yeah,
Was it Uber 3 times in the last 18 months?
yeah.
Yeah, through different mechanisms.
Exactly right, yeah, and we've seen likes of LastPass as well being impacted,
Yes.
and I
Yeah.
mean, and it's probably a
And
nice,
you and I are quite interested in that because we were LastPass users, both of us, weren't we?
yeah. I think a lot
And
of
what did we
people
do
were.
afterwards?
I think a lot of people were right, and they moved to
And
a
we moved.
competitor. That's it, right? And that's the ultimate damage, right? That can happen. People lose confidence, and they're going to vote with their money. They're gonna look for
Yeah.
something different, something better, and that's where your competitors then get to shine. So when we talk about from a business impact point, I think this is where. People that are sitting on the board, people that are running, responsible for lots of jobs and for the profitability of the organization. This is where you have to kind of take these things seriously.
Yeah.
And I guess this is a nice segue from sort of your previous talk with Tom around
Yes.
credentials.
So yeah, we talked
But
about credentials and how easy it is for people to go and buy credentials nowadays. We talked about how weak credentials can be, and that's a real issue. That once you've got credentials for an organisation, it's so easy to target them. So moving on, we're now looking at from an offensive perspective on ransomware. So tell us what the difference is between this and say, someone going through the traditional penetration testing view of the world and what you're actually getting that's different from Pentera.
yeah, absolutely. So the key thing here, there's a number of sort of, I guess, key areas that we cover. One is the ability to set up templates or scenarios that allow
Yep.
us to ask different questions about the attack surface. It's about automation, so it's about scaling across large parts of your organization, being able to run these tests on a regular basis, which would traditionally, from a human perspective, would be very difficult to do. It'd be
Yeah.
very time consuming, and you'd never get around to finishing, let
Yeah.
alone sort of get the reports and then understand what needs to be actioned out of those reports. And the other thing is safety. So a key part of what Pentera does is designed to run safely in production in a real environment with systems without impacting them, without doing
Yeah.
anything malicious, and without causing any kind of downtime. And it's consistent, right? Compared to a human tester or somebody who's doing a pen test, let's say, they're going to have a bad day. They're going to have a day where things don't quite work out, work in the right way from a consistency perspective. They've got to make decisions, right? And it's a very, let's say, expert driven field, so there's a level of
Yeah.
expertise that's needed to be able to sort of consistently get the same results. Whereas when we let the a platform like Pentera do this, you're going to get consistent results. It's going to be safe, and it allows you to scale, and it allows you to then compare your results against the last time you ran them. Some customers will run Pentera on a daily basis, right, and ask the same question, perhaps across different parts of the business, different locations, regions, offices, or they may run a test at scale, across a significant part of the estate on a given day. Look at the results, fix certain things, and then go back in and retest. So it becomes a continuous loop, right? And that's the important thing. It's
Yeah.
about being able to continuously assess your security posture. Some of the things that we do are like penetration testing, but we call it security validation. And the important thing about security, calling it security validation is we're validating from that initial foothold that an attacker
Yeah.
might get, which is, finding open ports, finding vulnerabilities. But then we're going all the way to like looking at something like credentials, which you talked about with Tom. Are credentials in use somewhere that represent weak credentials an attacker might leverage? And then a ransomware attack. What does that look like across the network? And the interesting thing here for us is because we can start to scale. And so just looking at a template here, just to show how easy this is to set up, right? You set up a subnet. Let's say I'm on a particular subnet now internally on the network. And we are looking at the internal network, right? Pentera sits somewhere on your network and is allowed to then extrapolate, well, what devices are live across that particular subnet? What can I find that's live? And then if I start to then probe them for a particular family of ransomware, and here I can pick a campaign, let's just pick Lockbit because we've seen that quite a bit. How does that protection look like across different endpoints? Now, I guess the big problem here that we see quite often, and I've worked in let's say anti-ransomware EDR space for a long time, and it wasn't the ability of an EDR solution to block the attack, but it was the configuration of that solution.
Yeah.
Is it set to detect but not to block? Right. So have you now been very cautious and set your EDR in training mode? You haven't turned it on in full aggression mode or necessary to block the attacks. And it's too late to learn that it's misconfigured when you get an attack. You want to be able to test these things before you see a real attack. What's more,
the real attack can be really quick as well, can't it? Once they've got a foothold, they can actually spread across the infrastructure rather rapidly. And because, again, they're automating what they're doing, they can actually take a foothold and spread really quickly and ransomware you extremely quickly.
Absolutely right. And it's too late, right? If you've got your EDR solution configured in a certain way, but not to necessarily block the attack, all right, great. You're going to get alerted that a ransomware attack's happened, but it's already happened by that time, right? It's probably halfway through various systems, and you're never going to be able to then stop that. So the other thing that happens quite often is just a general misconfiguration. There are certain settings, and every solution is different, but you need to have certain things switched on for it to work properly. How do you test that? How do you look at the ability of now being able to block different types of attacks across the estate, and then have you deployed the solution across the estate? And we see this quite often.
You could have gaps, couldn't you?
Exactly. And we've seen this, right? This is real in the sense that we've seen environments where somebody's either switched it off or forgotten to deploy to a certain part of the estate. Now, because your environment's changing every day, your IT landscape, let's say, is changing every day. You're adding new devices, building new systems. Have you then, from a baseline perspective, configured all the right controls to be able to detect and block the attack as well? So there's so many areas, that we can then sort of help identify, because of the nature of IT and the complexity of some of the things that you're configuring. And I guess the other thing here is that with different campaigns, they use slightly different techniques. Some of them will try, like Lockbit's, interesting one in case, point in case, in the sense that it will try and manipulate event logs. It will also, try and manipulate shadow copy, all of those kind of things. But it has its own, registry keys that it creates, its sort of initial foothold onto the network, all of those different stages. And we're emulating all of those in a safe way. And so the safety aspect, go on.
I think that's key, the safe side of things as well, because we're not going to encrypt all of the files. We're going to just take a subset copy that we can copy and then encrypt just to see if we can, aren't we? So we're not going to effectively lock out the whole of a server or a set of servers using this technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is, it's emulation is the key thing here. It still looks real as far as the EDR, the endpoint's concerned. It will still pick it up, and the good ones will pick it up as a ransomware.
You'd hope it was picked up.
You hope it was picked up, right? And it's configured and deployed to. But what we do is look for data on a given system. We'll target a system, we'll create a sandbox. I like to call it a sandbox. Essentially what we're doing is creating a copy of real data. We're not touching the original data, but within that sandbox, then we're emulating the encryption part of that attack. So the behavior aspects of file encryption. And what happens, interesting, with ransomware, right? And, it's something probably that you think about or not think about, but very quickly, in quick succession, lots of files are touched. So there's a lot of read-write events. And files are being written back to the disk that are now encrypted. The original files are being deleted. We're just kind of bypassing that process, right? We're creating our own sandbox to replicate that behavior. But as far as a good ransomware solution is concerned, it should be picking up those read write events. It should be now looking at files in real time and saying, oh, that looks encrypted, right?
Yeah,
And so that's what happens with most solutions these days. But what does the coverage look like? For example, within this scenario, I could target very specific file extensions. I could target particular types of data depending on the type of campaign that I'm running. And so
yeah,
this is where the breadth of detection becomes really important. Again, from a testing perspective, we can pick different campaigns. We continue to tune that within the Pentera platform. We continue to add new techniques as we see them. And the key thing here is it's not about IOCs, right? IOCs is kind of the old way of being able to block attacks. We're looking at techniques. We're looking at it
yeah.
from a
Yeah,
MITRE
it's
attack
not the
perspective.
indicators of compromise that matter; it's the techniques that are being used and how they're actually, getting a breach and then taking that
Absolutely.
foothold to actually, cause a ransomware attack.
Absolutely, right. And some of that could be things like obfuscated PowerShell scripts. We see a lot of malware that does that. We'll see certain outbound connections, so what we call the C2. It doesn't really matter where. And again, within the Pentera platform, we can replicate different types of exfiltration behavior. The key thing is, we're looking at it from a technique, from a behavioral perspective. We could actually replicate known IOCs as well. But again, it's designed to look real, right, to the
Yeah,
endpoint from an attack perspective. And then I can set up a schedule for that. So this is where the level of automation goes, right? I can set this up perhaps to run once a month at a certain time. I can randomize it. I can just run it on demand, right? So as and when there are some new learnings, perhaps because changes have happened in the network or policies have changed, new systems have been deployed to. Again, getting that baseline right. Where are we today on a specific type of ransomware attack? What does it look like? And this asks a really important question, right? That you might get from the business. If we were to have a ransomware attack tomorrow, what do we look like, and how do you answer
yeah.
that?
Yeah.
And I think
I
that's
think the other thing to think about, we talked about EDR detecting it and our internal people. A lot of mid-range business are using third parties to run SOC teams,
yeah,
and deliver them a SOC services. Again, this is going to help us, see if those SOC teams actually identify a compromise and actually are quick enough to do something about it as well.
no,
So it would be a good test, for
yeah.
your third-party SOC. Just don't tell them it's going to happen, and see what happens. When that ransomware attack starts.
Oh, absolutely. That's a really good point, right? So again, we're stress testing that element of the attack as well, right? Do you pick it up in time? Are your playbooks that you might have, at let's say, from an incident response perspective, kicking in because they're seeing all the right things, right? That looks like an attack, and we see that with a lot of SOC integrations where now it all the single point of failure is that your sock integration hasn't been connected up, right? It's not
Yeah,
sending the right logs to the to wherever you're orchestrating that information. Again, how
yeah.
do you test that? So what's interesting here is that I have got a test that I've been running in the background. So while we've been
Yeah,
talking,
it's a bit Blue Peter.
Blue
One I
Peter
prepared
style.
earlier.
Exactly. You got it. I've got my Blue Peter badge. So we've got a number of devices that have been discovered because we go through that discovery process on a subnet network, IP range, whatever we've specified. Now, from a emulated ransomware attack perspective, I've actually got Lockbit here available to emulate on a number of machines that we've discovered across the estate, and it might be that some of those um, aren't protected in the way that I want. Obviously, this is a demo lab environment, so there might be some systems that aren't quite configured in the right way or broken in some way. Right? We can use
Intentionally to be able to demonstrate it. Yeah,
yeah, and again, the common things are the service could be broken, it might not be starting, so a corrupt install. All of these things can happen as well. For us, we've got what we call RCE capability, so we can execute code now. We can drop some sort of payload and then go through all of the different stages of the attack. So in the background, again, the power of the automation kicks in that we've now simultaneously started emulating an attack on multiple devices. And I'll probably have to, for the interest of time, step back a little bit more and look at a previous attack that kind of brings all of this together. If we look at a scenario here where we've completed a ransomware kill chain, and I can actually click into that. So we get what we call a level 10 achievement, which is the highest that you can get in Pentera. It says, it's gone to all the way to the end of the flow of that attack, and it's completed something that's given us either a level of access that we don't want to give an attacker, or it's allowed us to do something that we don't want as an attacker. For us, an achievement as an attacker, because we're looking at it from an offensive security perspective, is good. From a defender perspective, it's bad, right? We've got some findings here. We've got some things that we need to fix. So I like to call this the perfect storm. And the perfect storm for me is the interdependency of different vulnerabilities that allow us to then maneuver from one stage of the attack to the other. So everything with a shield icon here represents a vulnerability. And this actually gives us a lot more detail than just a ransomware attack, because it's showing us additional vulnerabilities that have allowed us to get some sort of foothold into this environment. In this case, we've picked up some credentials, and I don't know how clearly you can see those. Maybe I should just zoom in a little bit more. We've cracked a password just by finding, by looking at network traffic. In this case, it's actually a Kerberos style attack. We've done some domain reconnaissance or AD reconnaissance, found a misconfigured account, grabbed the token, cracked the password, and then we validated that account. And we can see that it gives us what we call RCE capability, so we can start to open up a remote access channel.
Yeah.
And that continues further down the road in that we've now got a payload that's established a connection back to the Pentera. Again, this is safe, right? It's just a channel where the device can talk to Pentera, and the antivirus didn't pick up the payload. And again, we then executed some code, injected into a .NET assembly file, generated an encryption key, and then we've done this sandbox style enumeration of data that we can encrypt, so we can see the files that we've discovered. Some interesting ones in there. We've successfully encrypted those files, created a mutex object in this case, emulated deletion of shadow copy, and then completed the ransomware attack. And what's interesting here, this is obviously a broken machine because the antivirus didn't pick us up at any of those final stages as we replicated the ransomware part of that attack. But this brings together, our sort of traditional black box testing, which is really about baseline finding vulnerabilities that allow us to get a foothold and allow us to do what we call post-exploit. So once we're on a machine, right, we've compromised a vulnerability or multiple vulnerabilities, we're now on the system. Can I find some additional problems that allow me to bypass protection or controls and replicate a ransomware attack? And that's what happens, right? Because Pentera is staged in the sense that if I go back to this view here, we get what we call approvals. So in this case, I've got approvals switched on. I can turn approvals off. So as Pentera proceeds and finds a problem, it allows us to be able to approve the attack and then proceed to the next stage. In this case, it's going straight for privilege escalation and then going straight into the ransomware attack. And again, on the live test that I'm running,
got a couple of questions come in, so I'll just put these on the screen. So one of them is, how scalable is the system, in the real world production environments? What's the ability to retest and rerun the
really good question. I like
how much
that.
manual configuration is required? How does this require an agent for each device? And also on preparation, with the SaaS solution, what needs to be done. And don't apologise for asking questions. We've
Right.
also got a 5A to drop in a second as well. So if you want to answer those questions, and then
Yeah,
we'll move on to the
absolutely.
next one.
Yeah, no, I love the questions. Thanks for that. So how scalable is it? Yes, we're very scalable. So we have this, I guess, Pentera works in what we call a distributed architecture. But the most important thing to mention here is that we're agentless. You don't need to go and touch every endpoint that we're going to discover and install an agent. We have what we call a node, a main node. We may have multiple nodes that you put on the network to cover different regions, locations. But the key thing here is that in terms of setting up the test, it was as simple as what I showed earlier, right? It takes 30 seconds to set up a scenario, point it at a subnet, a range, an IP address, and then click run. Right. And the only other option I picked there was the ransomware campaign. And perhaps I might want to schedule it. There's like 3 or 4 different things in a given template that I might want to set, which is as simple as picking an option or entering a range or a target. And then it's ready. You've got your template that can now be run on demand or scheduled as often as you want. You don't need to create that template again. And the important thing here, something mentioned that I forgot here, is about remediation. So once we discover a problem,
I'll just move this off the screen so we've got a bit more screen. I'll bring it back on afterwards.
Yeah, sure. So I can actually click into.
I believe this is from Mark. These questions I've seen him pop up on LinkedIn with his name. I won't give his surname, but I think it's Mark who's asking the questions.
Thanks, Mark, for the questions. So we have the ability to drill into the remediation wiki. So the remediation wiki allows us now, and I think for some reason my screen's frozen on this one, so I'm just going to go back a little bit, and it might be the combination of streaming, being on a VPN, and of course being on a live demo as well.
There's nothing like the live demo, is there?
Yeah. So what I'm going to do here is, so essentially we can click into a given vulnerability and it takes us to the remediation wiki. The remediation wiki is a database of things that we've discovered. So in any given attack vector, you can actually drill into the problem, and it will then go in. If we take Lockbit as an example, it will go through all, the defining the problem, defining an outline of what happened, how an attacker potentially would leverage that vulnerability. In this case, it's being able to sort of bypass your anti-ransomware capability, and then the things that you need to do to fix that problem. Right. So the fix might be as simple as, you need to do some hardening on your EDR, your endpoint, when it comes to ransomware. You might need to patch certain vulnerabilities. So let's take Print Nightmare as an example. There might be other privilege escalation or remote code execution type vulnerabilities that we identify as part of that attack flow. And then to be able to go back in and use Pentera to retest. So the remediation is important. And I'm just trying to think what question 5 was.
Yeah, I'll just bring 5 up. We've got 5A on a separate screen. So on preparation or a SaaS solution, is this on-premise or a SaaS solution? It's a combination of the two, isn't it? So we've got a piece of software that sits inside the network, and then we've got the SaaS platform that utilised to kick off the actual workloads.
Yeah, so it's slightly different. So what we're looking at now is what we call Pentera Core, and that sits inside your network. It's on-prem. But you can host it wherever you want. So depending on what your network infrastructure looks like, it could be sitting in the cloud, but it could be sitting somewhere
as well
on a data center. We have what we call Pentera Surface, which looks at the external, which is a SaaS solution and sits on the outside. And we have to sit on the outside to be able to look at your external attack surface. But when it comes to the internal, and that's where people have sensitive data, that's where we potentially discover sensitive information, and you always want to have that under your control. We're not sharing any data out back to Pentera. It's all contained wherever you want it to be contained. Ability to bring in own solutions to see if a picked up alert, what rules missing, i.e. Defender Quest. Yeah, so we have the ability to integrate with SIM solutions. So everything that we do, we audit as part of what we call an action log. So every action that we carried out, we've got whether we completed, whether we failed, what the operation type was, what kind of hosts or IPs or systems were impacted. So you've got that full audit log. that you can now use to correlate with all of your other controls. So, in an ideal world, we want to have all of those integrations into a SIEM solution, maybe even some sort of orchestration solution if we're looking at SOAR, and be able to then look at that picture of what happened at each stage, what Pentera did, and whether that file or that detection happened on your side. So we also have something called a footprints, which now gives us an audit of every file that we touched or every file that we created as part of that attack flow. We do at the end clean up anything that we've dropped on a machine. Remember that these are all files that are benign. So everything that we're doing isn't doing anything malicious, but it's designed to prove a point that we were able to get from A to B. So hopefully, Mark, that answered all your questions.
Did that cover all your questions, Mark? I'll just wait for a reply. I don't know how quick.
And happy to follow up as well. I know we kind of sort of hit the end of time. I don't know.
Yeah, so we wanted to finish about the past anyway. So, Mark, if you've got any other questions, what we can do is pick that up later with you and just go through any pieces. But I think just to put things in perspective, what you're doing is using offensive technologies to validate the security against ransomware within an organization. It says yes, thank you, from Mark anyway. So we've
great.
Put that up. Yeah, so Mark's said it's answered all these questions. But that's the key thing, is it's looking at it from an offensive perspective. And I'm ex-military and I'm still involved with the military. And we always have to look at things when we're defending from an attacker's perspective, and that's what Pentera gives us, that ability to look at from an offensive perspective, to be able to understand how a vulnerability can then be taken and other things done on the back of that. So how can we exploit it and then move forward? And from that kill chain, you could see in that ransomware attack using the equivalent to Lockbit is we were going multiple stages of execution to get to that point. That's what the hackers do. It's not a single piece of software that's dropped on and it does it all in one go. It's multiple stages to get there. So by emulating it, we're actually getting a good picture of how easy it is for the attacker to do it, and identifying key areas that we need to work on to remediate to ensure that we're safer. I think you've muted yourself, Shakel.
I'm here. Yeah, no, absolutely. I was listening, but yeah, that perfect, spot on. I don't think there's anything I can add to that. Hopefully, that's piqued some interest with people, and happy to sort of go through the technology. I know this was like it actually went really quick, right? So we had 30 minutes just to sort of give you a quick overview of the platform, but there's a lot more that we can do with Pentera. Hopefully you can see some of the other webinars that we've done with Lee.
And if anybody's interested in booking some time to actually look at this, you can actually do it through that link, and set up some time, maybe 15 to 30 minutes to start with, just to talk through what your position is, what you're trying to achieve. And then what we can do is there's something bespoke for you, going through how this particular piece, the ransomware aspect, or even some of the other pieces like the credential management pieces, could help you understand better. My contact details you can get here as well. So through Linktree, Lee Cassidy, it's got all my details there. And again, you can also book a meeting through that. And then finally, if you want to look at the Pentera website to get a bit more of a picture of what the Pentera platform does, like Jack said, there's the core, which is looking at from a breached standpoint. So they've got into the system. What can they do from there? There's also Surface, which is looking externally and see what they can do it. And then there's some key components in there, like the ransomware, and also the ability to validate credentials and things, and also see what strength your credentials are. That's what we did with Tom, is we went through the process of actually hooking into an AD and actually seeing how strong the credentials of the users are. And it's quite interesting, even though we set a complexity level within, say, group policy and AD, it's quite strange how they can actually manipulate that to make it really easy, because they make it common words or things that are quite easy for them to remember, but really easy for people to guess as well. And we went through that with Tom before as well. But thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. comment, any questions you've got. If you'd like to meet up, you've got the details now. We can go through that and give you a good picture of how this platform can make a real difference in how you protect your infrastructure. And especially with the stats at the beginning, it is quite scary at the moment, the amount of ransomware that's going on, and there's so many of it. And one thing we didn't say is majority of those, Lockbit, Conti, and others, Maze, some of the key ones, are also available as software as service nowadays. So you can effectively rent a platform to go and ransomware other people with. And that is becoming a problem because now we've got more people that potentially didn't have the skills to do it themselves that can effectively rent the capability and go and attack people. So it is a scary world we're living in today. Well, if you want to hang about afterwards, Shaq, we'll just have a quick, review of what we've gone through and everything, and hopefully we can do something again, maybe in a slightly different area next time.
Oh, absolutely. Love to. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Shaq.